Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. This is great. I'm going to talk about how Wi-Fi came to cover the globe. And the first thing I want to do, why isn't this, there we go, is I want to say thank you to Seven Signal and to Heather for giving me the opportunity to present this webinar. This is really a special treat for me to be able to do this. So as you probably all know, I have written a book. It's a history of Wi-Fi. It's called Beyond Everywhere: How Wi-Fi Became the World's Most Beloved Technology. And for years, I have thought that the Wi-Fi story really deserved to be told. The backstory behind the development and the explosive growth of Wi-Fi is way more dramatic and more interesting and actually more fun than I think people even in the Wi-Fi industry are aware of. And so I felt that this book needed to be written. So someone needed to write this book. Why me? So I just want to introduce myself to you so you understand why I felt I had the background to write this book. So I was privileged to have a front row seat at the center of the Wi-Fi industry for over 25 years. I was the author of the 1993 DFW MAC technical proposal, along with two co-authors, that was adopted by IEEE 802.11 as the foundation for the standard back in 1993. And then right after that, I was tagged to be the chief technical editor, and I served as the chief technical editor of the original 1997 version of the standard. That's the 802.11 standard before we had any alphabetic suffixes on any of those. That was the 1997 standard. And then in 1999, along with a handful of colleagues, I founded the Wi-Fi Alliance. And I served in that organization's lead technical position for 16 years. And I retired in 2016 as the vice president of technology for the Wi-Fi Alliance. So with this, long-standing background within the Wi-Fi industry, I felt that I was in a pretty good position to tell the story, and so that's what I've done. So before we get into the backstory of Wi-Fi here, I just want to make a couple of points. One is Wi-Fi is not just a wireless LAN. It's the wireless LAN, right? There's a universality to Wi-Fi. It ended up really being the only wireless LAN globally that gets used. It's in every environment, right? Home, business, factory, agriculture, schools. It's in every country around the globe. It's in every type of device, thermostats, laptops, phones, refrigerators, cars, airplanes, whatever. But it turns out that if things had happened differently, the wireless LAN world might have fragmented along each of these dimensions, where you didn't have just a single wireless LAN that was universal in all of these, but instead you had different wireless LANs being used. That didn't happen. And so the Wi-Fi story is not just about a technology. It's a story about how a particular technology became this universal language. And the way that came about wasn't just because the technology is fantastic. It's really a story about the people and their organizations. So that's what I tried to capture in my book. So let's go ahead and dig into that story. How did Wi-Fi come to cover the globe? So I'm going to ask you to think, was this the beginning? Now, I don't know if many of you have seen this. I'll give you a little hint as to what this is by noting this. You might recognize the first name, because this, of course, is Hedy Lamarr's patent. Now, what did she actually patent? Well, some people think that she actually invented Wi-Fi. In fact, here's something from the National Archives, a U.S. government agency, says the World War II era actress who invented Wi-Fi, Hedy Lamarr. So that's something that that people sometimes say. Well, let's look at her actual patent and look at what she patented here. You can see it says a pair of synchronous records, one at the transmitting station and one at the receiving station, which changed the tuning of the transmitting and receiving apparatus from time to time. So what is that? Well, that is frequency hopping, which is a particular spread spectrum technique. So by hopping around a predetermined sequence of frequency channels, the signal is spread over a wider frequency range. So that's why frequency hopping, which is what Hedy Lamarr invented, is called a spread spectrum technique. But there's another spread spectrum technique, direct sequence. The way direct sequence works, it encodes each data bit into a code word consisting of multiple kind of smaller bits that are called chips. And here's an example. This actually comes from the 1997 Wi-Fi standard, where the actual data bits, you see those are the 0 and the 1 up top. It says scrambled data because it's gone through a scrambler. Those are encoded through a particular sequence of chips that are called the Barker code to create the transmitted channel. So the ultimate transmitted signal has much higher frequencies in it than the original, and so consequently the bandwidth that's required to transmit this has to be spread out. So this is another example of spread spectrum. Now, it turns out Wi-Fi originated as a spread spectrum, as a direct sequence technology, not frequency hopping. And so, I'd have to say, sorry, but Hedy Lamarr did not, quote, invent Wi-Fi. Frequency hopping was incorporated as an optional transmission technique in the original IEEE 802.11 standard. But in 1999, it was the direct sequence version of spread spectrum, not frequency hopping, that got incorporated into Wi-Fi. Now, both of these spread spectrum techniques became important in our story. In 1985, when the Federal Communications Commission came out with a report and order that basically enabled the applications like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth by opening up certain frequency bands for unlicensed use. There were three key elements in this 1985 ruling. The first is that it allowed devices to transmit without a license in certain frequency bands, most notably the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. So, prior to this, the use of unlicensed transmitters to actually communicate, communication signals was not something that was being done. It was, you would like a cellular operator or a television station, you would require a license from the FCC in order to transmit. So this was a radical experiment by the FCC that allowed devices to transmit without a license. They could do this only if they were transmitting at low power bands. You obviously wouldn't want people transmitting at too high a power level without a license, because that would definitely lead to too much interference in a wide area. But then the FCC also required that one of two different spread spectrum techniques must be used, frequency hopping and direct sequence. So this was the opening of the gate that allowed people to start to develop products. It took a while for people to figure out how to do this. It wasn't until September of 1988 that the first FCC approval was granted to a product that was following the new rules for unlicensed transmissions. This is the Telesystems SLW Arland product. It cost $1,500. You might look at this and think, oh, that looks like a Wi-Fi access point, or it looks like a router. Actually, no, this is a client device. This is a device that you would have external to your personal computer. You would plug it in through a cable, and then this would provide your computer with its wireless capability. Now, Telesystems actually was a Canadian company. They were later bought by a company named Telzon. What's interesting is that Telzon, in our story, you'll see Telzon eventually spun off a company called Aeronet, and Aeronet ultimately got purchased by Cisco. So in a certain sense, you might want to think of this as being the progenitor of Cisco's very successful Wi-Fi product line. That was back in September of 1988. So by the early 90s, various products were FCC approved and on the market. These are some of the companies: Proxim, Agilus, Symbol, NCR, Telzon. So this is before the IEEE standard. These products are, at this time frame, are all proprietary or custom. They are not in conformance with any standard. But I want to point out something about these companies. If you look at the logos of two of these companies, and in fact, what I'm about to say pertains to three of them, those logos both have incorporated in them a barcode and a barcode scanner, because it turns out that in the early 1990s, the main focus of the wireless LAN industry was not on the general purpose wireless LAN market that we think of today, attaching computers and all sorts of devices for a general purpose networking, but it was for very specialized applications. And in fact, wireless barcode scanning was a very, very important early application. This is an example of what we call vertical markets. So back then, the focus was on wireless LANs tailored to a specific application, these vertical markets. And an example is wireless barcode scanners. So three of those companies I showed you there: Symbol, Telzon, and NCR. NCR, of course, being National Cash Register. All three of those companies were very focused on wireless LANs as a means of addressing a particular need for wireless barcode scanners. Now, another example of a vertical market and a very customized application back in those days was wireless financial trading terminals, which brings us to the Chicago Board of Trade. The Chicago Board of Trade is a commodities trading floor in Chicago, obviously, a very chaotic environment. The traders would communicate with each other through hand signals to make their trades for soybeans and pork bellies. But I want to direct your attention to this guy right here. His name is Dietrich Volk, but in his role here in the Chicago Board of Trade, he actually has an alias. His alias is Peter Vogel, because Dietrich Volk was actually an undercover FBI agent. So the FBI was running a sting operation on the Chicago Board of Trade, and they were going after corrupt traders. This was called Operation Sour Mash. It was an FBI sting operation in 1999 targeting corrupt commodity traders at the Chicago Board of Trade. Now, this resulted in indictments, convictions, financial penalties, but there was actually a more important long-term result of this. The long-term impact that was most important of this particular sting operation was that as a result, the federal government forced the exchanges to replace their fraud-prone manual system with a network of wireless trading terminals. Here's a picture of those traders using the wireless trading terminals that got developed. Now this is obviously, it's an early wireless local area network. So just because of that, it's important to our story. But actually, this particular project has more importance than other wireless LAN projects that might have been going on in that same time period. It turns out that 2 of the 3 final teams that later in our story you'll see were competing for the to have their proposal selected as the 802.11 foundation protocol. 2 of those 3 final teams actually had experience on the Chicago Board of Trade project. In fact, they were, the team that actually won the project was had experience on the Chicago Board of the team that won the 802.11 MAC selection voting came out of an experience with the Chicago Board of Trade project. So some key concepts from this project ultimately found their way into Wi-Fi, and that's why this is important to our story. So Operation Sour Mash, we really could call it Operation Wi-Fi Progenitor. It was one of the major sources of the technology that ultimately found its way into the 802.11 specification and subsequently into Wi-Fi, which brings us to another of the key sources, which is NCR. Now, the group at NCR that was involved in the development of their wireless LAN technology was actually based in the Netherlands. It was a development team in the Netherlands that created WaveLAN. And this was an early project, an early wireless LAN product line. Like Symbol and Telzon, NCR was also interested in the retail barcode market, obviously, with as their name implies, National Cash Register. But NCR was also interested in the more general market as well with this WaveLAN product. It was a direct sequence product, 2 megabits per second. It turns out that an equally important role that NCR played, in addition to developing this technology, and being an important early source of the 802.11 technology, NCR was actually very instrumental in the creation of IEEE's 802.11 working group. I think we as an industry owe NCR a huge debt of gratitude just for their political push, really, back in the early 90s to get IEEE to establish a working group for the standardization of wireless LANs. And in fact, Vic Hayes from NCR, he served as the first 802.11 chair, and he was chair up until the year 2000, I think. Before we leave the Netherlands, I just want to point out something. I grabbed this map because it was just such a beautiful map. But look at this. They say that the Netherlands is right on the Pacific Ocean. I think the lesson we get from this is don't trust everything you see on the internet. Okay, so the IEEE 802.11 working group was formed in the early 1990s to develop a wireless LAN standard. And the structure of the specification that was being worked on in those days, and still to this day, this is basically the structure of the Wi-Fi family of standards, is a single medium access protocol, a MAC protocol, sitting over multiple physical layer protocols. And in the early days, and in the 1999 standard, there were 3 physical layer protocols that were going to be accommodated: direct sequence, frequency hopping, and infrared. And specifications were developed for all of those. But a major initial goal was the determination of the MAC foundation protocol. Now, the discussions at that time pretty much divided into two different camps. So we're talking about like in the 1992 timeframe here. And the two different camps fell into those who were advocating for a centralized MAC versus those who were advocating for a distributed MAC. The centralized proponents felt that there should be a central controller which assigns transmit opportunities to stations, whereas the distributed camp felt that it should be a distributed medium access method where the stations decide among themselves in a distributed fashion who gets to transmit when. Basically, one of the main arguments of the distributed proponents was that we're talking about operating in unlicensed bands, and it is difficult to achieve in practice a central controller that really can control the airwaves in order to assign transmit opportunities. And so instead, we need a medium access control protocol that is really well suited to an unlicensed environment, where it assumes there will be interference, it assumes that there will be competing traffic, and that the distributed approach is the best suited for that. So among the centralized proponents were IBM, National Semiconductor, Spectrix. Among the distributed proponents were three companies, Symbol, NCR, and Zircom. Well, Symbol, NCR, and Zircom ultimately got together, put together a proposal called the Distributed Foundation Wireless Medium Access Control, or DFW-MAC. And on November 11th, 1993, after a very intense and very hard-fought battle, DFW-MAC got selected as the foundation for the 802.11 standard. So the key elements from that include carrier sense multiple access with collision avoidance. There was time synchronization, power conservation mechanisms built right into the protocol, scanning and management exchanges. So these were adopted by IEEE in November of 1993, and this became the foundation for the standard as it got developed. So the original 1997 standard, it was MAC based on DFW-MAC with 3 PHY layers, and it operated at a maximum speed of 2 megabit per second. Now, it was widely viewed at the time that 2 megabits per second was not going to ultimately cut it, and a speed increase was seen as necessary to compete with Ethernet. So in 1998, the IEEE 802.11 committee formed a task group B, to develop what colloquially was being called wireless Ethernet. In other words, high rate wireless LAN operating at a 10 megabit or greater data rate, something comparable to the original speed of Ethernet. This was a holy grail of the industry at the time, to achieve 10 megabits while still being approvable by the FCC, because the FCC's requirements actually put some kind of a throttle on what was achievable. And so it took a little, took both science and art to come up with mechanisms that would support 10 megabits, but still meet the FCC's requirements. There were multiple proposals that were put forward. 3 ended up being the most notable from 3 companies, Microlore, Harris, and Lucent. I should point out that Lucent at this time is actually the same Dutch team that was with NCR. AT&T had acquired the NCR Dutch group, and then that got spun off into Lucent. And so really this is the same people that were involved earlier, but they just have different business cards at this point. Now, Harris and Lucent were backwards compatible with the 2 megabit standard, but Microlore was not. That was one of the main issues that was being debated. But it was a very intense competition. The voting process to select the winning proposal was going smoothly, and Microlore was actually on the cusp of winning until there was an objection. And the objection was launched it was a point of order that got launched that was an accusation of voting irregularities. So, I mean, this sounds just like our politics today, right? An accusation of voting irregularities was brought forward. The IEEE 802.11 committee, in response, halted the process and subsequently restarted it. And after the restart, Harris and Lucent developed a merged proposal that they presented called Complementary Code Keying, CCK. It was an 11 megabit per second direct sequence. And that was adopted by IEEE on July 9th, 1998. So it ended up being the combination of the DFW Mac-based foundation plus the CCK for 802.11b that yielded the full blueprint for Wi-Fi. We're still about a year away from Wi-Fi, but that's where we were. So this brings us to the company 3Com. Now, 3Com was founded in 1979 by Bob Metcalf and others. Metcalf was Ethernet's inventor, and 3Com was focused, not surprisingly, on Ethernet. And 3Com was a very major player, actually, in the office automation world back then, with a family of products based on Ethernet, providing office automation applications for small offices. And so people generally know this. What is not so well known is their role in the Wi-Fi story. And it's an important one. And it's very ironic that they have an important role in the Wi-Fi story, because Bob Metcalf himself once compared wireless computing to porta potties. In 1993, Bob Metcalf wrote an article saying that porta potties are found in places where it's very inconvenient to run pipes, but bathrooms are still predominantly plumbed for more or less the same reason computers will stay wired. So I guess this is what he had in mind for wireless computing. But despite their founders' hesitancy about wireless, 3Com started up their own wireless initiative in 1998, and ultimately that it ended up involving a 3-company team that 3Com put together to develop a family of products. The team involved Symbol Technologies. They were chosen by 3Com to develop a family of high-speed wireless LAN products using source technology that was incorporated in a chip from Harris Semiconductor. And these products would be then marketed under the 3Com brand and sold through 3Com's distribution channels. So this 3-company project got the code name Trilogy. And why is this particularly important? Because this is really the beginning of what was going to become the Wi-Fi Alliance. This was the start of an effort to bring companies together and in a way that supported the 802.11 standard. So this was the Trilogy team was the start of the Wi-Fi Alliance. But there was another organization at the same time that was going. It was called Home RF. And you see they had a very cute and very consumer-friendly logo. They had a lot of marketing prowess. Home RF was formed in 1998. They were focused on the home market. They had something on the order of 80 companies participating in this initiative, including many of the big names. Proxim, obviously, were a big name at the time in the wireless LAN world, but other, high-tech giants were playing a big role here. Intel, Siemens, Motorola, Microsoft. This was a 1 megabit per second frequency hopping system that was focused on the home market, but it was competitive with IEEE 802.11. This was not the same as IEEE 802.11. So to those of us who were involved in 802.11, this was a scary thing. This was a real challenge. Now, in late 1998 and early 1999, the three companies involved in the Trilogy team worked together to put proposals in front of HomeRF to try to convince them to adopt 802.11b as the multimedia enhancement to HomeRF, basically to try to create a truce between these technologies, to try to get a way to where they would work together and to kind of bring everybody under a common umbrella. They were rejected. And this rejection created a bitter rivalry. So the Trilogy team sat back and thought, well, these HomeRF proponents have done something really good. They formed a consortium involving multiple companies, and they're using that not just to develop the technology, but to promote it and to help to market it. And that seemed like a really good idea. They were being very, very successful with that. So the Trilogy team's idea was to form a consortium similar to HomeRF, but focused on the new 802.11b version of the wireless LAN standard. So Symbol, Harris, and 3Com invited Lucent, Aeronet, and Nokia to join with the Trilogy team to form WECA, the Wireless Ethernet Compatibility Alliance. Now, that was the initial name of what became the Wi-Fi Alliance. It wasn't called the Wi-Fi Alliance yet because the name Wi-Fi hadn't even been selected yet. That was one of the first things that this group needed to do. Here's the title slide from WECA's initial analyst briefing. You can see there's the 6 companies: 3Com, Aeronet, Harris, Symbol, Nokia, and Lucent. This was in August of 1999. And so one of the very first things that they did was to come up to hire a branding organization to come up with a name and logo to replace IEEE 802.11 high rate wireless LAN. Interbrand came up with multiple possibilities, including Torchlight, Trapeze, and Dragonfly. If Dragonfly had been selected, this might have ended up being the Wi-Fi logo. And here are some early graphic logo suggestions from Interbrand. You can see that the one in the middle is kind of getting close to what ultimately got adopted as the logo for Wi-Fi, which was basically this. Now, another thing was going on at this same time. In July of 1999, in New York, we had this. I apologize for the blurriness of this. This is a screen capture off of a video. I hope you recognize that that's Steve Jobs. And yes, there is the toy that was referenced back in our trivia questions. Steve Jobs introduced the airport wireless LAN at a Macworld show in New York in 1999. And he used a hula hoop to demonstrate to the crowd that he could stay connected to the internet even without wires, putting his laptop through the hula hoop. He had a lot of fun with that, his typical showmanship. Now, this was a very significant deal. The deal that Apple did was with Lucent. This was significant, well, primarily because, Apple chose 802.11 rather than HomeRF or Proxim. So that was a really good step forward for the proponents of Wi-Fi. There was a $99 price point. That was a major step. That would have to be matched by competitors. But there were some potential negatives here. The airport branding was potentially an impediment to the successful launch of the Wi-Fi name. But more importantly, Apple isn't shy in developing their own versions of technology and having proprietary standards that are Apple specific. And so the big question on everybody's mind was, would Apple tweak this into an Apple specific version of 802.11? That would be a fragmentation in the market that we were hoping not to see. Well, the answer came back just 7 weeks later. Apple joined WECA with a commitment to Wi-Fi certify their products. And so that was a big event. HomeRF ultimately got canceled. The companies who were all involved in HomeRF all moved over into the Wi-Fi Alliance. One of the main reasons for this, in addition to in addition to the superior technology of Wi-Fi, but also the marketing power that Wi-Fi was starting to show. HomeRF was trying to get the FCC to adopt a ruling that would allow them to have faster speeds in their frequency hopping technology. That ended up actually happening, but it happened too late for them to really be successful with it. So HomeRF got canceled. Now, a big focus of the Wi-Fi Alliance from the very beginning has been interoperability certification with the Wi-Fi certified program. And it was decided to certify products in as close to their real life operation as possible, which means actually testing products against other real products to verify that they are interoperable. This has been a very, very successful program. And in April of 2000, the first Wi-Fi certifications were announced. You can see the 4 companies whose products formed the test bed are those 4 of the original founders of the Wi-Fi Alliance. They were obviously all very active at the very beginning. And of course, today we have 80,000 Wi-Fi certifications. This program has been just tremendously, tremendously successful. And the Wi-Fi Alliance today has over 800 member companies. This is just the list of the companies who are the sponsor companies who serve on the board of directors, have representatives on the board of directors. You can see Apple, Cisco, Intel. Nokia is the only one of the original founders who is still there. But there are over 800 member companies in the Wi-Fi Alliance. The global value of Wi-Fi today, in 2021, 3.3 trillion. In 2025, it's estimated to be up to 4.9 trillion. That's trillion with a T. How did this happen? This was the result of the strong partnership between these two organizations. It's really the working relationship between these two organizations that ended up resulting in the 20 billion devices around the globe. Now, we've touched only about the first 200 pages of a 432-page book. There's some topics that I didn't address today. The Internet of Things is obviously important. I mean, Wi-Fi initially was just certifying laptop interfaces, basically, but now it's in all manner of devices. There's several chapters on China's attempt to replace Wi-Fi with a national technology and the diplomatic and technical conflict that resulted from that, ultimately with Wi-Fi being allowed into China and being as prevalent there today as is everywhere else in the world. There's a lot of drama of putting Wi-Fi into cell phones. The title of my chapter on that is Love-Hate. It's basically like a love-hate relationship between the cellular industry and the Wi-Fi industry. A lot of drama there. And also, why is Netflix an entertainment behemoth today? Well, just a quick hint, Wi-Fi smart TVs, right? That's what really kicked Netflix into the stratosphere. So I just want to talk a bit about the future really quickly. Looking at the Wi-Fi generations, this is something I picked off of Wikipedia, and it's just useful to show. Point number 1, don't blindly trust Wikipedia. These dates are all wrong. But point number 2 is you look at the maximum link rate there. It's just a record of rapidly increasing data rates. which isn't just increasing speed, but that also includes increasing capacity. Point number 3 is you look at the chart about the channels that are, the frequency bands that are being used, starting with the original 2.4, then into 5 gigahertz, and now into 6 gigahertz operation. This has similarly increased capacity and is a very major thing going on now, is the movement of the industry into the 6 gigahertz band. So these tendencies will not stop. Wi-Fi technology will continue to increase in its data rates. It will continue to increase in its capacity. It will continue, hopefully, to have increased bands allocated for its use. And that's what we can see continuing in the future. And then point number 4, I just want to quickly go through some of the new directions, right? We have specialized versions of Wi-Fi called Wi-Fi Halo for IoT, really hitting the IoT sweet spot, long range, 1 kilometer type range, but still able to operate with coin cell battery devices and yet support devices like cameras that have megabit type speed requirements. Wi-Fi, we all know, is the natural connectivity for VR. Apple introduced their Vision Pro, and of course, it incorporates Wi-Fi. We're seeing the increasing availability of 6 gigahertz, and around the world, there's some major deliberations going on right now within the international community about the use of Wi-Fi within 6 gigahertz. We all hope that turns out successful for our industry. And of course, the big thing coming is Wi-Fi 7. It's going to speed and capacity. There's really tremendous industry and market enthusiasm for this. This is going to be a big deal next year. In 2024, we expect to see it ratified. We expect to see certified products and products available in volume. So back to Bob Metcalfe, a third thing that he's known for is Metcalfe's law. The value of a network is proportional to the square of the number of interconnected devices. That has proven to be true with lots of different networking technologies. Looking at what it means for Wi-Fi, there's 20 billion devices, 20 billion squared. I can't even read that number. I don't know how to say that. It's astronomical. And that just goes to show that product developers will continue to see Wi-Fi as the most attractive connectivity option because of its massive success out there in the market already, and it's the likelihood that it's going to just continue to expand. So the Wi-Fi explosion to be continued. And with that, I'll say thank you. And Heather, maybe we have time for questions.
I believe we do. And we've got one in the Q&A panel already ready for you from our friend, Nick Smith. If anyone else has any questions, make sure you get those in the Q&A panel. Forrest says, what a great talk. Yes, wonderful. We've gotten several bits of feedback throughout the session, noting how great this has been. So thank you very much, Greg, for a wonderful session. And let's get into some questions. So Nick is asking about the 1985 FCC initiative to open up parts of the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands for unlicensed use. He's saying that it seems to have helped pave the way for the development of 802.11 in the US. When did other regulatory domains allow these two bands to be used without a license to enable Wi-Fi tech to be used globally?
Right. Basically around the same time. I mean, this has been a major success factor for this whole story, is that the counterparts of the FCC in other countries around the world pretty much adopted similar, very similar strategies in these bands to open them up and to allow this market to happen. So the fact that Wi-Fi right from the beginning was a global market was due to the cooperation really among all of the different regulators. Now, that wasn't that wasn't necessarily 100% true. The story about China that that I alluded to, that is some of the later chapters of my book. Initially, China was not allowing the same kind of power levels as the rest of the world. And that would have crippled the Wi-Fi market in China, because the distance that would have been achievable would have been way less than what's achievable elsewhere in the world with Wi-Fi. Fortunately, we were able to lobby the Chinese MII, Ministry of Information, whatever that stands for. That's their version of the FCC. We were able to successfully lobby them and to get them to increase that. They subsequently tried to put a halt to the proliferation of Wi-Fi by, in fact, they banned the iPhone for a while, strictly because the iPhone incorporated Wi-Fi. But that was because they were trying to promote their own alternative to Wi-Fi at the time. That also ended up being a failure, and we ended up being successful bringing Wi-Fi into China. But anyway, long answer to the question, there was cooperation for the most part right at the beginning among all the different regulators, and that was a major reason for Wi-Fi's global success.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for the question, Nick. And thank you so much for the answer, Greg. We've got an anonymous attendee who's asking what happened to 802.11ad 60 gigahertz in the home. Did it die?
I think it's still on the books. I think that, so this is just my opinion. It probably, what has happened is that, more standard Wi-Fi ended up with increased data rates, increased speeds, increased capacity. And so the use cases for 60 gigahertz have ended up not being quite as promising as were originally anticipated for that. But like I say, it's still on the books, and we very well may see that it comes to life in a big way in the coming years.
Great. All right. And then Tina's asking for some recommendations, Greg. So first, she says, thank you for the wonderful session. And could you please share some books or university courses, obviously other than like 7 Signals or yours, that are comprehensive for wireless networking beginners like her?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Reading textbooks about Wi-Fi is not something that I do. So I'm not sure what to recommend. I can work with Heather offline, and maybe we can put together I can take a look and we can put together a list of recommendations.
Yeah. I know a lot of our guests usually recommend the good old CWNP, kind of textbooks. So that's always a good place to start. But yeah, let's put our heads together and think about that. All right. And Forrest is asking, what was the standard designation for 9 megahertz?
I think you mean 900. I think he means 900 megahertz.
I think so too.
Yeah. So Wi-Fi initially didn't operate in 900 megahertz. Some of the first wireless LAN products were focused on the 900 megahertz band. Like I believe that that Telesystems product and the Proxim products, at least initially, were 900 megahertz. But I will point out that the new Wi-Fi Halo, the version of Wi-Fi that is focused on IoT, that operates in the 900 megahertz band. The reason for that being that, as you all probably know, the higher you go up in the frequency bands, the more difficult it is to achieve range, especially through walls. And so consequently, 900 megahertz has some better propagation characteristics for distance than 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. And so Wi-Fi is actually now operating within the 900 gigahertz band for Halo. Um, but there was no specific name for that band. It's just Halo is an example of a networking system that is now taking advantage of that.